Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Robinson Run. I'm your host, Brady Kreitzer. I am a historian of the American frontier of the 18th century, and on this series we are studying one single community along a 5-mile stretch of a creek called Robinson Run. We're looking at the people that lived here, the events that shaped it, and ultimately trying to determine how this helps us understand the Revolutionary period a little better. Now, it is fall of 2024. It's a beautiful fall day, too nice not to film for sure. And I am here in the small community of Walker's Mill, Pennsylvania. Walker's Mill, you can see behind me, is in Collier Township, Allegheny County, and we are more or less smack dab in the middle of Robinson Run. Today we begin our study and our introduction of really two of the most important people in this Robinson Run story, and they will be with us for the entirety of it. And they are a pair of brothers from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, named Gabriel Walker and Isaac Walker. The Walker's journey is amazing. It's tragic at times, triumphant in the end for sure, but very indicative of the Scotch-Irish experience here in North America. They moved as a family. And they moved as a group, and they found a land to claim as their own. We'll start with an introduction to who they are. Gabriel Walker was born in 1735, and his brother Isaac was born 9 years later. And they were two men, as I've said before, really kind of betting on themselves. Gabriel Walker was a married man. We saw his marriage by the Reverend John Cuthbertson in our previous episode in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in Octorara Township, to Mary Ball. And as they begin to move west, we're going to see Mary and Gabriel have 4 children. Martha, Mary, James, and one child whose name we do not know. And they will have those children before they move. They'll have 10 children total. So as important as obviously Gabriel Walker is, it's definitely his wife, Mary, who's the MVP of that group for sure. But Isaac, his younger brother, a man in his 20s at that point, is kind of going stag. He's a single man, you know, and he's going to come out here not to transplant his family in that sense, but he's going to come out here to really start anew and start his own family. So we see two men, close brothers, right? Close relatives in different stages of life, which I think is pretty common. When they move out here, again, it's about 1772. So you have to remember that the West, Western Pennsylvania, is still A, claimed by Virginia, and B, still British imperial territory. Now, for some important context here, this is about 9 years after the end of the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War, or what they would have called the Great War for Empire. And as the British controlled this territory, it was very important for them not just to control it on paper, but to control it with actual British citizens living here and claiming the land for their own. So in the previous episode, we saw a man named James Ewing, and we saw how he purchased land in this area and became a very powerful landowner. Gabriel and Isaac Walker in 1772 aren't going to do it that way, but they will end up being his neighbors, because they're going to use a policy or a maneuver, maybe a practice we would describe as a tomahawk claim to come to this area. So a little bit about that. A tomahawk claim is essentially an impromptu, maybe illegal or unofficial claim to a landscape in the West, used in the 1760s, 1770s, and 1780s. And to make a tomahawk claim, what you'd basically do is come here, find land in which no one's living, no Europeans that is, and claim it as your own. And they were usually 400-acre parcels, and you would normally find major landmarks as your unofficial survey. Because remember, the British Empire didn't have surveyors abundantly in this area. They didn't have legal processes, right? Agents in this area all the time. So they had to make do with what they had. And what they settled on was, again, the tomahawk claim. If you can come here and you can improve the land, clear it, plow it, build a cabin. It's essentially unofficially yours. And this works well for them, and definitely works well for Gabriel and Isaac Walker. You can see again behind me the community of Walker's Mill, Pennsylvania. This is Isaac's tomahawk claim. He'll build a grist mill here. He'll make a life for himself here. A grist mill was a very low risk opportunity to make a lot of money. And Isaac will do that here. Gabriel, several hundred yards to my east, will do the same thing. He'll establish a claim for himself as well. This worked out well during the British Imperial period. It was really put to the test during the Revolution and after, when rich land speculators from the east, like George Washington, right, you might know him, purchased this land. And he never came here, he never lived here, but he speculated in it. So on paper, on a deed, the land was his. In reality, for the people that farmed it and for planted it and cultivated it, the land they believed was theirs. That led to some very messy legal disputes in the 1780s and 1790s. But here we are in Isaac's property, Walker's Mill. This is dead center in the middle of Robinson Run. And it's a really neat 18th century community that you can still kind of see a little bit if you're able to strip away the modern age. Isaac, a young man, unmarried, really wanted to make his way here and make a name for himself. Isaac will end up marrying a woman. Again, he arrives here single, named Mary Richardson. She was originally Mary Stewart, and Mary Richardson lived in what is today Westmoreland County, near Fort Ligonier. A few years before this, she was a mother of 3 or 4 children. I say that because one of them would sadly lose their lives, and the timing escapes me right now. But she was a single mother of multiple children because her husband was murdered by British Allied Indians during the 1770s, the earlier part of the decade. So Isaac married her, Mary Richardson, and she became Mary Walker. And she joined him here on this property that would become Walker's Mills. Now in time, by the 1790s, Isaac Walker would be joined by other neighbors here on site. There'd be many cabins and communities, and he'd be like the small landlord in this area. But this spot where we are now, Walker's Mill, Pennsylvania, is right along Robinson Run and right where Isaac made his home. Now it's easy to find Isaac's property because it's well delineated and the name remains. Gabriel's is going to be a little harder. We know it is due east of our location, but the exact spot of his home is a little bit tricky to nail down. I have been working closely with a lot of local community members who have grandparents and great-grandparents who are able to kind of key me into the relative location of the spot. And I'm very happy to announce that I have in fact found it, and I can't wait to show you how. So hold tight for 1 second. We're going to head over to that direction, and I'm going to walk you through some serious history of how we bring the 18th century back to life. See you there. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back in the office, and we are going to begin our search for the Gabriel Walker cabin, which is, in my opinion, a really critical historical site, not just because of its placement in Robinson Run, but in the larger story of the American Revolution as well. It's not quite a battlefield, but the Gabriel Walker homestead is the site of a major massacre during the American Revolution. And it's a site to me that is A, worth finding, and B, worth commemorating. So I want to talk to you about the process of how I located this site, and I'm very confident in saying that as a professional historian, I have found this site. I would stake my reputation on it for sure, just because I'll take you through the process of how I did that. But it's a critical site, and it's one that we'll talk about later in more detail in the series. But one for now, we just want to kind of get on the focus of identifying. Whenever you utilize a micro history, whenever you engage in this kind of boots on the ground history, in a very real sense, you have to be able to use non-traditional sources. So a lot of these places, you know, the good information is not going to be found in ledger books or documents or land deeds,
but in a lot of times in the family stories and the oral histories and the old wives' tales of the community. So something that I wanted to do very importantly when I began this project was talk to as many local people as I could, people with names like Walker and Ewing and Scott and some of these other names we hear, and really kind of key in on what those people knew, what they heard, and maybe what's been passed down generationally through their families. Some of the people I've spoke to, including a lot of people, again, local historical societies, have been really great about sharing this information. And it gave me a really good starting point. You know, where was this place? Where did Isaac Walker settle, right? Where was Ewing's fort, which we talked about in previous episodes? All that research began there. But as a historian, it's really my job to be able to take that information and then verify it against really reliable, tried and true methodology, right? The sources we always tend to go to. So again, land records, journals, receipts, deeds, battlefield accounts, and pension applications. These sorts of things are what we as historians use to build our studies and analyses, right? And oral traditions and oral histories are equally valid and just as important. But it's kind of like a game of telephone, you know. Over the years, things get changed from one person to the other. So we want to strip down those oral traditions to their bare bones, understanding they are as valuable as any other source, and then see how we can fit it into a larger story. So when looking for the Gabriel Walker homestead, we're going to try to draw on a lot of the old tales of the neighborhood. And one of the ones that I found that's very valuable for this is written by a man named Milton Allison in the 1950s in the Western Pennsylvania History Magazine. And it's called Robinson Run Sketches. And he's a man, again, elderly by this time, born in the 1800s, that's basically relaying information from people he knew growing up as a child to tell us where a lot of these places are. Now, Milton Allison did a profile, which you see on the screen, of a small railroad community called Iffley Station, Pennsylvania. And Iffley Station, by the time Milton was writing in 1952, was pretty much gone. He calls it the Iffley Ghost Town. But today, 70 years later, in 2024, it is long gone. Sayonara, there is nothing left at all. Not even the railroads are left. As we're going to see, the railroads have been replaced by a walking trail, which is actually super valuable for me for identifying these places. But Milton Allison will say about the location of Iffley, and this is what matters to us. According to Mr. J. Scott Walker of Walker's Mills, a descendant of Isaac Walker who lived there, first of all, time out. It doesn't get any better than that, right? We're talking about the Walker brothers. Here's a direct descendant of Isaac himself. The farmhouse at Iffley was built on the site of the original Gabriel Walker cabin. And that should make your alarm bells go off, right? As a historian, I get really excited about that. Because he's not writing about the Walker cabin. He's writing about this railroad station, Iffley. But that little nugget of information was put in there. We'll skip over this next part. It's pretty telling and gory, but we'll do a whole episode on that. But what he says is, it occurred somewhere in the bottom lands of the present-day farm, now crossed by the railroad due east and west, but then skirted by Robinson Run, which there makes a long bend to the north. The distance of this spot from the western borough limits of Carnegie has been variously stated. Mr. Sipe refers to the scene of the tragedy as, quote, not far from the present town of Carnegie. So thank you, Milton Allison, because he's given us not just clues about where this town of Iffley was, but he's given us landmark clues that will not move from the 1950s all the way to the 1770s. And what he says is, again, bottom lands near a farm, now crossed by the railroad and Robinson Run. So I know the farm is gone, but I know that Robinson Run is still there, and it was back then too. And I know that the railroad, even though it's gone, has left a pretty clear imprint in the form of a walking trail, public use walking trail. So we're going to begin with Mr. Allison's analysis here. And then we're going to go to the maps, and we're going to try to locate where this mysterious Iffley is as our starting point. Now, Iffley, here's a good map from the old days of railroad. Iffley is not there anymore, nor is Iffley Station. But this is a very meaningful, useful, practical railroad map of the Pittsburgh region in the 1890s and probably 1900. And what you're looking at here is if you need to get around, I mean, it's a novel idea, but imagine a train that could take you from one place to the other. Those of you that are interested in trains know it'd be lovely to have this system back for public transportation, but we don't. But if you look at this map, you can see the major stations and the minor stations along the different railroads around Pittsburgh. And if you can key in on the left side of your screen, I made a yellow circle. It circles a small place called Iffley. And if you look just above it, you're going to find the designation for Ewingville, which we were at in a previous episode, a little further east down the railroad tracks. And right beside it, Walker's Mills, which is where we began this episode this time. So we know that Iffley, located on the map by that thick blue line is the railroad, was right around there. And the thin black line beside it, a little ragged, a little more winding, is going to be Robinson Run. So again, I want you to look really closely at the left-hand side of your screen, and you will see both Iffley, you will see the railroad that went through the area in which the station sat, and Robinson Run. And given what Milton Allison has told us already, all right, it's bisected east to west by the railroad. It sits on the bank of Robinson Run. And later he will say, which I didn't have on the screen, at the foot of a hill. You can really kind of triangulate exactly where Gabriel Walker's homestead was. So let's go to the map. All right, here is a map, we'll go back to that one, of the modern area which Milton Allison was talking about. So behind my big head is the community of Rennerdale, Pennsylvania. The creek is very visible, sort of center left of your screen. It's kind of brownish pea soup color. That's Robinson Run. And over it is a bridge called Nike Site Road. The line that bisects it, it looks like a road. It goes right through the center of the screen, up to down, is the rail trail that used to be the railroad. So we can triangulate more or less where this area was located. This is a modern map. It's forested. There's no farms available. I don't see anything that even looks like a farm on this map. And that can be discouraging because we know that where Nike Site Road and the former railroad, the rail trail meets, kind of makes a prominent X. And that's, again, just basically center left of your screen. That should be about the site of the Gabriel Walker homestead. But the problem is, Milton Allison said there was a farm there. And he said in the present day area of the farm was where the Gabriel Walker cabin sat. And again, I can look at this and be discouraged, but then I realize we have a lot more resources that lets us see the world the way that Milton Allison saw the world in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, not just in our own world. So for that, we're going to go to, of all places, Penn State. All right, so here we are, courtesy of Penn State. Penn State maintains a really incredible collection of aerial photographs of really the entire state of Pennsylvania, taken at various intervals, and they've compiled them into one searchable database, the PASDA database. So I would encourage you to look at that. But what I have here is a zoomed in image of the exact scene we just saw in 1932. So it isn't 1770, it isn't 1850, but it is almost 100 years ago. And you can see a few key elements here. Number one, the railroad track, which cuts this entire image in half, is still in place. But directly to the left of it, you're going to see Robinson Run, right down the middle of the page, going top to bottom, in its original, raw, unchanged form, just like we saw on the previous slide. Now, the bridge, which I showed you, on the modern map is not there, but there was a smaller bridge, and that was there in Milton Allison's time. And what he said was that dead in the center of the screen, when you were crossing that smaller bridge, there was a farm over the side, a flat bottom land, and a hill. And the farm was bisected east to west by the railroad. And if we look at that very carefully, and we look at that very closely, you will find the area that they're talking about is this area right here. This is highly technical, folks. This area right here. And today, that is a forested bottomland. But based on, again, the descriptions of the time, based on the current situation of Robinson Run and the railroad that we see running here. This is the railroad. Okay. And based on Robinson Run, which is going to swing right down through here, we can fairly, with I think a high degree of accuracy, barring an archaeological survey, say that that the Gabriel Walker homestead was right here on this site. So now that we found it, at least from the office, let's go back in the field and see if we can track it down.
All right, everybody. So here we are. I am standing right now on the Panhandle Trail. It's a walking trail, former railroad track, which would be very helpful for us here in Collier Township, Pennsylvania. And behind me, I'm just east of Renderdale, Pennsylvania on the trail, is the location, the site of Robinson Run. And on the other side, the farmstead of Gabriel Walker. As we've just seen, tracking down the Walker plantation was a little bit difficult. Required about 220 years of maps and some modern technology to help us. But behind me here is the site. This was the site where Gabriel Walker maintained his plantation. This was the site where, of course, we're going to see, as time will show, one of the most horrendous and tragic events of the American Revolution entirely occur on this site. But it was always a site established to be and meant to be a farm. Gabriel Walker had a nice spot here along Robinson Run. And it was a spot where he wanted to build his, not only family, but his community as well. His brother was just down the creek. And the economic opportunity of the Chartiers Creek and the Ohio River was not far away. So remember, Gabriel will be married, father of 10, and this is the spot, more or less, where he made his home. Now, we will revisit the spot in the future for a very different reason. We're going to be talking about, again, the American Revolution and the real kind of horrors and realities of war that will befall Robinson Run as a result. But hopefully this site can show you that a little bit of creativity and a lot of really sound history can open up a lot of doors to, rediscovering the 18th century. You'll recall that in the documentation that we read regarding the location of Gabriel Walker's homestead, it mentioned that there was a flat piece of ground with a large hill. And that large hill is behind me, and you can see peeking right over my head is a large white dome, ominously in the corner. That large white dome is actually what's called a Nike site. It was built during the Cold War in the event that any of America's major cities were attacked by, some Soviet missile or something. These sites would respond in kind. And I believe there was like a missile on the site. I'm not sure. I don't even know if that's public knowledge, whoops. But that's what that site is. So if you can reference that white dome behind me and follow it to the bottom of that hill, again, according to the period documents, Gabriel Walker's homestead sat in a flat plain by the creek at the foot of a large hill, and you're looking at it. We can do a lot to change the landscape from the 18th century, but the big chunks remain. Creeks remain, hillsides and mountains remain, and that's what we have to use. So this is the Gabriel Walker homestead behind me. Very important. I'm very happy and pleased to have shown you how I found it. It'll be nice to kind of finally put that to rest. But we will be back to this site when we discuss the American Revolution on a much more somber and terrible note.